Hello, welcome and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me for the Team Build T-Level webinar today. Before we get going, there's a few things that I need to explain to you. The first thing to note is that you are in listen-only mode. To engage with us, please use your screen panel to adjust the audio and also to use the panel to ask questions. The plan is we've got lots of people here on the webinar today and we want to make use of the time and ensure that you can ask your questions and we will respond. I've got two colleagues alongside me, Jenna and Gemma, who are here today to manage some of the questions that are coming through. We will endeavour to answer all of the questions. However, with the huge volumes that we've got on the webinar today, what we will do after the webinar is ensure that you get questions that have been produced as part of this webinar alongside the slide deck and the recording. During the webinar, there will be a couple of polls that we will be asking you to engage in, so please feel free, as I said, to use the panel when we get to that point in the webinar. So, just to introduce myself, my name is Anita Crossland and I'm the Post-16 Senior Manager here at City and Guilds. And what we're going to do is start looking at the aims and objectives of this webinar. So, the aim really is to get some in-depth knowledge on the post-16 education reforms, to find out what T-Level is all about, and to learn about the new work placement pilot scheme that will begin next April. Also, and most importantly, is to find out about the consultation process that we're waiting to hear from DFE on and how you can get involved. And as I said earlier, it's about asking questions and having the opportunities to have some response. It is really important to say at the beginning that this is an England-only reform. So for those colleagues that I know have joined us from the nations, you're welcome. And hopefully, if you do have any questions, then obviously please feel free to ask. So, to start off with, the first question. How much do you know about the Post-16 Skills Plan? What we'd like you to do, using that panel, is to actually pop in where you feel your knowledge sits at the moment. This will really help us to ensure that you get the most information, and it may just be to reconfirm what you already know. I see people are starting to engage. Thank you very much. Okay, so looking at the polls, we can see we've had great sort of results. And quite interestingly, sort of the majority of people are sort of in the OK bracket or poor bracket or very poor, and that's absolutely fine. This webinar really is to engage with you and ensure that you get the most information that we can provide. Okay, so moving into the actual presentation. So, as many of you will probably know, change is coming. If we look back through the last few years with technical education, in 2011 we saw the beginning of the Wolf Report. Within that report, we saw the key focus being on Key Stage 4 for the 14 to 16 provision. That really saw vocational qualifications starting to be reformed and look at what was offered to Year 10 and Year 11 learners. From that Wolf Report in 2011, we saw the integration of the design principles with the current technical qualifications that are on offer by awarding organisations at the moment. It was important actually within those design principles to ensure that we had qualifications that were starting to look like the qualifications that have that parity of esteem, and certainly we have in the 2019 performance tables, we have over 100 technical qualifications now on offer. Last year, in April 2016, we saw the independent report that was commissioned by government called the Sainsbury's Review. This was Lord Sainsbury's, Professor Alison Wood, and an esteemed panel of people from education looking at some recommendations of what needed to happen within technical education. Within that Sainsbury's review, we saw 34 recommendations that were made to government. In July last year, in 2016, we saw the post-16 skills plan be announced, and within that, there was full acceptance of the recommendations, and we started to see some articulation of the details. Running on from last July, in the autumn of this year, in October 2017, we saw the action plan starting to give more details around what T-levels were going to look like, and certainly some indications of the early pathfinders within that. What's quite interesting is, as you can see from this slide, from the Wolf report, the Sainsbury's review, the post-16 skills plan, we're actually starting to hear the terminology, T-levels. And that's quite interesting, because what we're starting to see through social media, and even government itself, are starting to use the terminology T-levels when we're talking about this reform. So what is the government's vision? Certainly the current system is complex. The importance of needing high quality, rigorous qualifications. They believe that actually there's some really key fundamental changes that need to happen with technical education to ensure that we have parity of esteem with our academic choices for our young people. So the first problem is there are too many overlapping low quality qualifications. And we're starting to see the solutions in terms of clear technical routes that will lead to skilled employment. We've started to see rationalisation happening of QCS-style qualifications starting to take effect, looking at those low take-up qualifications and funding starting to cease on some of those qualifications. The second problem the government looked at was the unstable provider base, and they believe that the solution to this is to ensure that providers offer high-quality qualifications that actually speak to the local needs. The third problem was not enough apprenticeship opportunities, and still the target of 3 million by 2020 is sort of held up there as the solution for apprenticeships. And the fourth and final problem that they identified within the skills plan is the lack of career advice and guidance, and the belief that we need that strong career advice and guidance to a young person in year 9 when they're starting to think about their options and also their post-16 advice. What's quite interesting, and you may have seen on social media, that from January next year, new rules about post-16 providers being able to access these young people, being able to give advice and guidance to year 8 and 9s as an alternative option to an academic route at post-16. So what does the overview of the new technical system look like? So if we look at this diagram, at the bottom we have the GCSE and technical awards. And this really affects our year 10 and 11 learners, to those learners choosing their options for the first time. As part of Progression 8 Attainment 8, learners can take up to 5 traditional GCSEs, and then for the first time in bucket 3 can take up to 3 technical awards. These technical awards don't make the young person competent and certainly are not designed to drive the young person into an occupation that they may be ready for. The technical awards allow those young people to start to think about that industry. So it really looks at the overview of that industry without sort of picking up competency. The idea is when that young learner finishes their GCSEs, they then have some choices. There's an academic option or there's a technical option. If that learner isn't quite ready for either of those options, there is a transition year that the government is in the post-16 skills plan. The transition year really to help that learner prepare for the next step. Today we're going to look at the technical options. So whilst in this diagram you can see in the academic options you have your A-levels, your applied general and your progression into higher education, this webinar really focuses on the technical option. So, the technical options. The skills plan looks at college-based technical education, which includes placement within industry, and also employer-based technical education, for example, apprenticeships. The college-based technical education and the employer-based technical education will be based on the same set of design principles and the same set of standards that will be delivered to an apprentice and a full-time learner. The progression opportunities for that young person is to move into higher education at level 4 and 5 or degree and higher apprenticeship. This diagram also indicates that there will be bridging provision where appropriate. However, we don't have details of that yet. But ultimately, the outcome is into skilled employment. So, what the skills plan set out were really some significant reforms for technical education in England. The skill plan looks at there being one occupation with one standard, one qualification, and one licence to practice. I'm going to unpick that during this webinar and start to look at what that actually means, and hopefully dispel some myths that you may have picked up along the way. So the post-16 skills plan sets out a number of significant reforms for technical education, focusing on 16 to 18-year-olds in full-time education. The skills plan identifies 15 routes. These routes will be led by a panel of employers who will have real sort of ownership around that qualification design and certainly what's needed for those specific occupations and industries. The time frame for this is from the rollout in September 2020 with sort of rollout up until 2027. What's quite interesting is the Secretary of State is going to issue overall certificates, and the Institute for Apprenticeships is going to start to look after technical education. So IFA becomes IFA from April 2019. So what's happened already? As we've spoken about, last year we saw Sainsbury's review the post-16 skills plan. Then in the autumn last year, we saw the technical education bill go through the House of Commons and the House of Lords to identify some key facts. That went through both houses and actually went and became the Technical and Further Education Act in April 2017. That Technical and Further Education Act really sort of highlighted four key things. One, the insolvency regime for colleges and what could happen. Two, the extended remit of the IFA. Three, progression opportunities, so the right for FE and training providers to support schools in promoting vocational courses or technical education from January 2018. And fourthly, career education information, advice and guidance, which Ofsted will start to comment on in terms of career advice and guidance through their inspections. That brings us up to date to autumn 2017, and we are expecting our consultation to begin from government. And the consultation really is about what the proposals are. And that's why we felt today it's important to talk to you about the consultation process and actually give you an update in terms of what's happened so far and to start thinking about how you can engage with that consultation. What we will start to see is some tendering on the back of that coming out in the spring next year. So let's get into the 15 routes. So the first routes that we believe that will be ready for teaching from September 2020, or pathways within those routes, is the first one is children and education. The second one is construction. And the third one is digital. I have to say that these aren't the full routes, but actually pathfinders for occupations within those routes. and I will give a little bit more information about that in a moment. The remaining routes will actually be rolled out, as I said, from 2021 through to 2022 in agriculture, environment and animal care, business and administration, catering and hospitality, creative and design, engineering and manufacturing, hair and beauty, health and science, and legal, finance and accounting. It is worth noting that these 15 routes also include the 4 protected services, sales, marketing and procurement, social care, and transport and logistics. The Department for Education has already identified that these 4 routes will be delivered via apprenticeships. So let's look at the components of the new T-level programmes. At the heart of the T-level programme will be the technical qualifications that will be designed based on the occupational maths that are the same as the occupational maths within the new apprenticeship standards, and will be designed and developed by the employer panel. Maths, English and digital skills play a big part in the T-level programme. As yet, we don't know whether that will be GCSE or functional skills, but certainly will play a big part in the T-level programme. We do know that work placement, and has been indicated up to 3-month work placement, will be part of this programme. The substantial work placement and quite different to what we've offered in the past. There will be a set of transferable skills and behaviours that will need to be delivered. So contextualised numeracy, literacy and digital skills, but also those behaviours that are matched through to the apprenticeship standards, such as teamwork, communication, problem solving. There will be an element of licence to practice in sectors where that's applicable, and there will be an element of non-qualification activity. Again, details of this are still yet to be defined, but this is the outline of the T-level programmes. So, what we have been told is that we will have occupational maths for each pathway and within each route. We are expecting these occupational maths to be released in early December. And what we do know is that we won't be bidding as an awarding organisation at route level, but more likely a pathway or occupational clusters. We will be invited to tender, and then as an awarding organisation, we will decide which pathway or occupational cluster we will look to. Obviously, technical education is in our heritage, and we fully expect to support the skills plan and T-levels in the future. So now on to work placement. You may have seen that there's actually a pilot starting in April 2018. What's quite interesting is this pilot will really test that component of the T-level programme. We have, we believe, 20 plus colleges that have been involved and have been accepted onto the pilot. The pilot time and duration will last between 45 and 60 days, or a minimum of 315 hours. The work placement needs to be occupationally specific, focusing on developing practical and technical skills for that individual learner. It's supposed to help at student readiness, so to meet the expectations for those employers and for learners. It needs to be external, so unfortunately it cannot be used within the colleges or providers, kitchens, salons, nurseries, etc. It needs to have access to learners with special education or disability needs. And there has been a work placement fund that has been ring-fenced for those centres that are involved in that pilot. The pilot will run, as I said, from April next year through to summer 2019, and that will be able to give us some real sense of the issues that may arise from that pilot. So, the latest announcement from government, which was in autumn this year, Justine Greening actually announced that the public consultation would go live, and we were expecting that early part of December. The public consultation really looks at the design of the T-levels and allows all interested organisations and individuals to contribute and develop these new programmes. And it's really important to have your say. It's about ensuring that we future-proof the T-level offer if this is going to work. What's also interesting is that the pilot, the consultation, as I said, is expected to last 10 weeks. So we'll roll out in December through at the beginning of next year. And it really is key that you get involved. The government will then have 8 weeks to look at the feedback and to respond to that consultation. Justin Greening also said that the ambition was that the majority of providers would be offering T-levels by 2024. So already that's a slightly different message than we saw in terms of full rollout of T-levels by 2020. That's 7 years away, so quite a long time. But what's important is actually that we get it right. We've also heard that the first three T-levels will be in digital, construction, education and childcare, but not full rollout of all of those routes. And I will explain what those particular pathways are. But first teaching of those first pathways will begin in 2020. So, a little bit of information about the T-level panels and also the IFA route panels. There are two panels involved here, both using industry experts to help shape the T-level programme. First of all, the IFA route panels are made up of 15 panels which have chairs, vice chairs and members. They are industry experts, as I've said, and their core responsibilities are to manage those standards, those same standards that fall within the apprenticeships, to sign off qualifications that have been developed based on those standards for T-level programmes, to sign off the occupational maps, to be involved in the assessment plans for apprenticeships, and also to advise on funding levels on behalf of the Institute for Apprenticeships. They will also oversee and give final approval to the work on the T-level panel. The T-level panels are made up of practitioners, employers and industry bodies that represent not only at route level, but actually at occupational pathway level. Their core responsibility is to develop the outline content for each T-level. And they have to ensure that the reformed qualifications have genuine currency with employers. It's important to remember these are not just at route level, but actually at pathway and occupation. So, where do we go from here? We've already talked about the consultation that we're expecting to hear any day now. And what we will do post this webinar, as soon as we get the information of that consultation, we will let you know and send a link to that consultation. What we will also start to think about is that tendering process that we are expecting to hear in spring, early summer next year. That tendering process will be a rolling programme that will run between now and 2022. As I said before, the first delivery of those early pathfinders are in September 2020. So the winning awarding organisation for each of those pathfinder routes will need to prepare and support centres and providers to deliver those first early pathfinders. And as I said, from Justin Greening's announcement in October, 2024 is the full adoption timeline where we expect to see the majority of centres delivering these new T-level programmes. So, to give you a little bit more information around those 15 routes, what I've said is by 2020, the limited pathways in digital, construction and education have identified the pathways within each of those routes. So the first ones to go in digital is the software application design qualification or standard. In the construction route, it will be the building services engineering, and in the childcare and education route, it will be education. What's quite interesting is it will only be offered to a small number of providers. How those providers are chosen, we don't know, but what it will be is to test that first launch of those limited pathways. The following year, 2021, there will be the remainder of the digital occupation or pathways rolled out, the remainder of the digital pathways, the pathways for construction rolled out, the remainder of the childcare and education pathways rolled out, and then the full pathways for engineering and manufacturing, the full pathways for health and science, and the full pathways for legal, finance and accounting. We are expecting for each route to be 3 or 4 pathways. And then the final rollout in 2022 will be the remaining routes: hair and beauty, agriculture, environment, animal care, business and administration, catering and hospitality, and creative and design. So again, to identify in 2020 a small number of providers, 2021 it will be to a selected number of providers, and then 2022 available to be delivered by providers who want to or able to. As I said, we don't know the criteria of being a selected provider. So I've given you quite a lot of information, and there is a lot of stuff that we still don't know. But just as a recap, the summary of what we do know to date focuses on 16 to 18-year-olds. So the T-levels focus on that. What we do know is that the T-levels will have a level 3 outcome. Quite interestingly, when we talk to some employers, actually there are still level 2 skills within those routes that need to be adopted. We do know that the expansion of the Institute for Apprenticeships is going to happen to take in technical education. So in April 2018, IFA will become IFATE. We know that employer-led panels will set the standards required for T-levels. We know that they're going to be based on common frameworks for those 15 routes that will affect both classroom and employer-based training. Each route will contain several pathways which cover a range of occupations, so not one qualification per route, as originally was sort of mooted. There's only going to be one awarding organisation that will be licensed to offer the T-level for an occupation or cluster of occupations under this new model in England. We do know that the T-level programme will be based on a 2-year programme, the first year being year 1, the core. The second year will be the specialisms and pathways. We do know that it needs to include up to 3-month work placement. We do know that it's to include maths, English and digital skills. We do know that it's to include behaviours that are aligned to apprenticeship standards. We also know that funding has been ring-fenced for the T-level programmes at £900 per year. More details of that still haven't been shared with us. What we don't know, and unfortunately these are the questions that we perhaps can't answer for you today, but something that you may want to think about when you are engaging with the consultation. So, what will be in the qualifications? What's going to be the mix in terms of assessment? Will we have endpoint assessment, exams, synoptics? Will there be a retake policy? Will it be similar to an A-level? What's going to happen in that transition year? Who's it aimed at? Level 1, level 2 learners? But what about those learners below level 1? How will the transition year prepare learners for that T-level or that academic route? Will the current offer at level 1 and below need to be looked at? What training and support will you need as centres? What resources, DPD, components of the T-levels will you need support with? What's the future of adult or short courses? What's going to happen to adult loans? What's the progression opportunities? What happens if a young person starts a T-level and after the first year wants to step off to an apprenticeship? And they do that. What are the maths and English offer? Is it GCSE or is it functional skills? Will the employers decide what are the components and the entry requirements? What's the transition between the current offer and these new T-levels? As we know, we have current QCF qualifications that are funded under Section 96. We have current technicals that we're starting to see a huge increase in numbers. So for the next 7 years, will we have all of these qualifications on offer and all of these qualifications funded? What will the learner profile be to access T-levels? Will there be entry requirements? And what will be the measure of success? Will it be destination? Will it be the completion of all components? As I said, these are things that we don't know the answer to yet, but things that you may want to consider in the upcoming consultation. So, what are the next steps? We'd like you to share your thoughts in a question and answer session with us. Prepare to respond to the consultation, and obviously we want to give you a little bit of information about what happens after this webinar. So, we're going to start to look at some of the questions that you've started to ask. And gosh, there's quite a few. We will try and get through as many as possible. So we will start to go through some of these questions. So the first question, are applied generals in the academic route similar to the level 3 BTECs? Unfortunately, I don't really know in terms of the applied generals. Certainly within the skills plan, it doesn't talk about applied generals. It only talks about technicals. So for us, it's really sort of looking at T-levels. So again, it's really important to sort of potentially ask that question, but certainly skills plan really focuses on those T-levels in terms of what the technicals will start to look like. Okay, so the second question that I'm going to look at is, have the transferable skills been announced yet? No, they haven't. What we do know is that the employer boards have been asked to look at the behaviours that are set within each of the apprenticeship standards, and obviously to look to those in the beginning. So what we've started to do is start to look at those behaviours and ensure that we're sort of starting to look at what's needed and what employers are looking for. The next question is the assumption that these will be full-time programmes? Yes, certainly the Department for Education have outlined that these are for 16 to 18-year-olds in full-time college or sixth form or a post-16 centre. So next question, is 20% college-based education the same as 20% off-the-job training? Yes, we believe so. That diagram was taken based on the Department for Education's image, so and that was certainly taken from there. So we believe that's the case. So next question, really interesting. Who is responsible for sorting out work placement? I think the pilot scheme for that work placement actually starts to sort of unpick some of those, and the pilot centres that are involved in that will start to feed back to the Department for Education. So it's really important that those centres that are involved obviously raise any concerns. And again, if you are sort of taking part in the consultation, we would ask you to really sort of ask those types of questions. Moving on from that question is, will there be employer engagement to accept learners. Absolutely, employers will need to sort of engage in these T-levels, and I believe that the Department of Education and IFA are planning to do a lot of employer engagement activities and events to really sort of ensure that our employers are well aware of what's happening in the education system. Are there any plans to offer access to T-levels to older learners? Again, that was quite interesting, as I said in my point about what I don't know yet, is what's going to happen to adults. Certainly the post-16 skills plan focused on 16 to 18 education. It didn't mention adults. However, as we know from a provider base, you have mixed cohorts, and we do have adults entering education at a later stage and may want to access this. How accessible will a T-level 2-year programme be? So next question, will this presentation be available for us? Absolutely. Everybody that signed up for this webinar will receive a recorded version and the slide decks, and also all of these questions will have answers attached to them, and you will also get those question and answer sessions sent to you next week. Next question is asking, can we enrol a 19-year-old onto T-level study programmes? Again, we don't have that information as yet. So what we're finding is as soon as we get more information, and hopefully that will come out of the consultation, we will let you know as soon as we know. So next question, obviously there's still quite a few questions. As I said, we will try and get through as many as we can, but please don't worry, your questions will be saved and they will be answered because they're all really, really valuable questions. Where will students complete the transition year? Is this at school or in an FE provider? Again, no details of that transition phase or year have been shared yet. As we know, transition year or below level 2 can be provided in different establishments. As soon as we get any more information on that, we will let you know. So, next question is, where do traineeships fit into the plan? Really good question. Actually, are traineeships working? Do we need to look at lessons learned from traineeships? Do we need to start to think about that? Again, really valuable question, and certainly something that you need to think about considering in that consultation. Okay, another question around work placement. Work placement requirements go up to 3 months. What is the minimum requirement? So again, in my slides and some information that came from the Department for Education as part of the pilot, it talked about a minimum of 45 days or 315 hours. Whether that in the T-level programme is across the 2 years and down to the provider to decide, I think will all start to come out as part of the pilot. So again, really important that we keep a close eye on those pilot centres and how they're getting on. Okay, on to the next question. We've got 90% of our forensic science learners progress to university. Will this not be an option under the T-levels? Again, really, really good question. So in my earlier slide, you may have noticed that bridging provision that the Department for Education talked about. So again, a learner moving from either an academic route to a T-level or vice versa. Certainly for a young person wanting to progress to university, we need to keep options open, and we need to ensure that those learners can transfer and that their options aren't shut off. So we would hope that there is that provision, and we will certainly be working with universities, as we do already with our technical qualifications, to ensure that UCAS and the HE providers are involved in this consultation. Okay, next question moves on to English and Maths functional skills. So, Kevin, you've asked, I don't see where English and Maths at level 2 GCSE or functional skills fit into level 3 T-levels, as we usually require students to have already achieved these. So again, yes, that's a really good question. Are the entry requirements onto T-levels going to be at a sort of level 2 or the new sort of rating or new grading of 0.4? Is that a requirement as an entry? Is there an expectation for each of the sectors that that young person continues to study English, maths and digital skills? Again, that's all in the hands of employers in terms of what their needs are for their specific occupations and their specific pathways. So next question by Paul. What is meant by only one awarding organisation? So Paul, what we have been told is that there are too many awarding organisations and we need to start thinking about rationalising those offers. So part of the T-levels and post-16 is there will be a bidding and tendering process that awarding organisations will be invited to tender at pathway or occupation. We don't have details of that process yet, only that we believe from the latest guidance that tendering will begin in the spring/summer of 2018 on a rolling programme. But it will mean technically that if an awarding organisation wins that tender, they will be the only licensed awarding organisation that can offer that full-time T-level programme to those 16 to 18-year-olds. But again, as we get more information, we are happy to share. So, next question, Simon, you've asked, how will this impact on the current vocational delivery at entry level and level 1? Really good question, and certainly one that you may want to consider for the consultation. We don't know what that transition year will really look at. You know, will it be about getting that young person ready to take the choice in terms of academic or technical? But what happens to a huge majority of learners that are at entry level 1 or below? How do we get them ready in the year? Can we get them ready in the year? Again, depending on the assessment process, etc. You know, certainly as an awarding organisation, it's our job to help support you with those learners. So, next question. Who will decide if work placement is closely related to T-level pathways? So, again, within the pilot, and as I said earlier in my slides, the pilot sort of talks about the importance of work placement being relevant to that occupation or cluster of occupation. But that young person experiences up to 3 months work placement in a realistic environment, in a real environment that actually helps to prepare them for the work and that industry. But again, who actually decides that? Maybe a question for the consultation. Okay, moving on to another question. Will the period of assessment take place at the end of the delivery, i.e. 3-month window? So again, Keith, that's a really good question. The panel members of employers will start to look at, I'm sure as part of their work in terms of content, they will look at the assessment approach. What we hope, they will have assessment experts in the room or to be able to provide that guidance on that assessment method. Whether the 15 routes and the pathways within those routes have different assessment methods, we don't know. Within the post-16 skills plan documentation, it talked about the importance of externality, it talked about the importance of synopticity, that we would move away from that unit by unit assessment. So I'm sure we will start to see that coming forward as we sort of progress through this process. So, good question from Paul. We are in the process of delivering the new technical qualifications. Are there likely to be changes again? We really don't know. Our technical qualifications were built on the design principles that were set by the Department for Education a couple of years ago. As part of the process to ensure that they meet rigour and quality and they sit on the performance tables, we have to submit them to the Department for Education every year. We are not planning to change our technical qualifications over the next sort of few years, and certainly we have seen a huge increase in the numbers of people using our technical qualifications. And remember that timeline, as I said, first rollout of the T-level programmes is in 2020, with full rollout not until 2024. So technical qualifications are going to be around for quite a while. And if you look at the post-16 skills plan, which mentions external assessment, mentions synoptic assessment, the technical qualifications are a good way to start thinking about what the future of the new T-levels may look like. So next question from Anne. How will SEND learners be supported on the substantial work placement? Again, Anne, I think that's part of the pilot to look at all aspects of the requirements and guidance around these work placements. Certainly within the guidance documents by the Department for Education, it does talk about SEND learners and ensuring that they have got access to that. The process and the actual delivery of that, and to all learners, obviously is going to take a huge amount of time and collaboration and negotiation by the providers and the employers. Whilst there is the capacity fund that has been identified for these pilot centres, and how they use that capacity fund, maybe in terms of how they access employers, whether they need to sort of recruit internal staff to organise that, whether they need to provide specialist equipment to those learners or travel expenses, I think will all start to come out through that pilot. So next question from Keith is, will any resources be available from City and Guild? Well, of course, Keith, we would like to help all our centres, and certainly, as I've said before, our heritage is in technical education. We've been delivering technical education since the 1900s, since we were given the Royal Charter. It's something that we continue to do and support our centres. So absolutely, we will be looking at all of the types of support that you may need. We will be consulting with you. We will ensure that our offer actually supports you and what you need. Okay, next question asks, are the T levels then lower than, say, a level 3 apprenticeship? Okay, so if we just to sort of remind ourselves, the T-level programme and the apprenticeship within that sort of same occupation will be based on the same standards that are written by the employer panels. The idea is that that parity of esteem is there both at apprenticeships but also across A-levels. So no, I wouldn't say it's lower. It's based on the same standard, but until we start to see the content and more in-depth information coming through those employer panels, we can't answer fully that question. Next question is, did you say funding was 900 per learner per year? If so, isn't that a massive drop in what we get now? So for now, just to sort of remind you, current programmes of study for full-time learners are based on, funding isn't based on £900, it's based on 900 hours per learner per year. So sorry, Paul, if I made a mistake there. So it's T-level programmes are based on 900 hours per year. Currently, you are funded at up to 600 hours per year per learner. So actually, that is an increase. Obviously, not huge, particularly in terms of what you've got to deliver within that T-level programme. And obviously, from the budget earlier in April, when this 900 hours worth of funding per year was announced, we haven't seen more detail. As soon as we get it, as always, we would share through our funding webinars that information with you as we move forward. Okay, so next question. In order to include all learners, will there be entry qualifications which will provide access to these T-levels? That, again, really good question in terms of that transition year. Will those qualifications potentially that may sit in that transition year need to start to be tailored to help support that learner move through to a T-level? For example, will they need to move away from unit by unit assessment, or will we need to consider the type of learner that's on that transition? As I said, we haven't got any more detail around that transition year, but these are all really important questions to use as part of the consultation. So, next question from Matthew. Is it planned to have T-level qualifications that align to apprenticeship standards, which would allow an apprentice to progress? So, as I said earlier, Matthew, the T-level qualifications will be based on the same standards as the apprenticeship standards. As we know, not all apprenticeship standards have a qualification within them on the ON programme, but we know that the standard, both for T-levels and for apprenticeships, will be based on the same set of skills and knowledge. The idea is that we have a comparable occupation that's based on the same standards. But yes, very good question in terms of that progression. You know, what happens if a learner studies the first year of the T-levels and then gets an apprenticeship? Can they bring that learning with them from the first year or not? Will they have to start again? Is somebody that perhaps has studied the T-level programme in full-time education, can they move on to a higher level apprenticeship? We would assume so, but again, haven't got details. Okay, moving on. Next question. Currently, is there funding for work placement to employers? Sorry, again, I'm just going to repeat that. Currently, is there funding for work placement to employers to encourage them to support? So, not under the current programmes of study, but as part of the pilot and the capacity funding that has been available to those 20 plus centres that are involved in those pilots, that capacity fund can be used in a variety of ways. We can certainly send you the link to the Department for Education's webinar that was held recently that gives you a little bit more information about that pilot. Okay, next question. What if your employer pulls out of the scheme halfway through? Yep, good question. How do we sort of plan for that? How do we stop that from happening? Again, let's maybe a good question to ask in the consultation. Okay, going to a question now around Devolved Region, so Northern Ireland, etc. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, this policy reform is actually for England only. So at the moment does not affect Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland. And we've had no indication in terms of what might be happening within those regions. But obviously, as always, as soon as we do, or any information that we have, we're more than happy to share via our alert systems, through our webinars, our technical advisors that are out on the ground, our business managers that are sort of set up in each of our regional areas. Remember, we have offices and people on the ground in Northern Ireland, in Wales and in Scotland. So if you have specific questions, please don't hesitate to contact your regional business manager. So when will you be publishing the pathways and technical occupations plan for the Pathfinder route? So it won't actually be us, City and Guild, that will be publishing the pathways. As I said, we are expecting the technical occupational maps to be released by the DfE in early December. That's been the indication that we have been given. And obviously those early pathfinders, which I said in terms of digital is the software application, construction is the building service engineering, and the childcare education is the education pathway. As soon as we have information, we will provide you with that information. So we're coming to the end of the webinar. I know there's lots more lots more questions to get through. So I'm just going to pick out the last couple before I sort of say goodbye. Will NVQ and VRQ qualifications be phased out or be allowed to continue? We believe that they will be phased out, certainly through the action plan. What will happen to Section 96? What will happen to funding for those will be interesting to see. But we believe they will be phased out, and this will be the offer for full-time 16 to 18-year-olds going forward under the technical route of the skills plan. Then the last question, how were the pilot schemes selected? So John, I believe you're talking about the pilot schemes for work placement, and if that's the case, the Department for Education actually had an application process. They ran a webinar and they asked for people to apply. So again, we can send that link out to that webinar, which gives you the detail, but I do believe those the closing date for submissions has already passed. If it's pilot scheme for the selected centres for the first Pathfinder routes in 2020, we still don't have that information yet. But what's really important is we want to use this network. You know, we've had over 1,000 people sign up to this webinar, so it clearly shows there is a real appetite for information, and we need to ensure that we give you the tools to be able to help you plan for the future. So this is the first step in terms of how we communicate, how we ensure that you're getting what you need. So to end the webinar, as I said, just to remind you of what are the next steps. We will collate all of these questions, and I do apologise again for the questions that we weren't able to get to. Your response has been incredible, and thank you so much for continuing to stay on the line. We will share all of the questions with responses to those questions post this webinar. We will also send you a recording of the webinar. Hopefully the sound is okay, but we will also send you the slide deck. We will communicate with you when the consultation opens, so you've got access to the link of that consultation, and I cannot stress enough how important that consultation is. And then sort of finally, you know, don't forget we are here and we will continue. This is the first step in the journey to T-levels, and as soon as we get information, we will absolutely ensure that you get it. So before you sign off, we would like you to take the final poll just to gauge how we've done and what sort of we might do to improve. So goodbye from me, and thank you all for your time and participation in today's webinar.